The town of Flagstaff sits at 7,000 feet above sea level, where the air is thin and cold, even in summer, and the stars at night hang so low and bright that strangers often stop their cars on the highway just to look up. It is the kind of place where people know their neighbors, where the same families have run the same businesses for 3 generations, where a man can sit at a diner counter for 30 years and always find his coffee waiting before he asks. It is also the kind of place where nothing much happens, until the night it did. The Ridgeline Diner had been on the corner of Humphreys and Route 180 for 41 years. The sign out front had lost 2 of its letters sometime in the late 90s, and nobody had ever gotten around to fixing it. The booths were upholstered in dark red vinyl cracked at the seams and repaired with electrical tape in 3 places that the owner, a man named Dennis Caulfield, had been meaning to replace for going on 6 years. It was the look of a man who has just heard a name he thought he would never hear again, spoken aloud in the real world outside the place in his memory where he had kept it for 12 years. "How old is she?" he asked. 40, Ruth Ann said. Rex sat with that for a moment. The math landed. The math confirmed something. "Sit down," he said quietly. Not a command, something else entirely. "Please." Ruth Ann sat down across from him, and the other 5 men rearranged themselves with a naturalness that told her this was a group that had long ago learned to move together without instruction, like a single organism with 6 points of contact. "Tell me about the highway," Rex said. "Everything." She told him. 917, the broken call, Highway 89, 15 miles north, the words she had caught and the ones she had not, and the sound at the end, knuckles on glass. She told him about the 4 unanswered callbacks, the police dispatcher, the 90-minute patrol sweep. She told him the ways she had reported things in emergency rooms for 35 years, in order without embellishment, leaving nothing out. When she finished, Rex looked across the table at the broad, dark-haired man on his right. That was Merle Stanton, though Ruth Ann would not learn his name until later. He was 52, Rex's second, the man who had been at Rex's side for 20 years, and who communicated in the compressed language of people who have spent too long in close quarters is to need full sentences. He was already reaching for his phone. Rex looked back at Ruth Ann. "The tattoo," he said carefully. "Where does she have it?" "Left shoulder," Ruth Ann said. "She's had it for 12 years. I asked her about it once. She said it was a reminder of something important." Ruth Ann paused. "She wouldn't say what?" Rex was quiet for a moment. When he spoke, his voice had dropped another register, become something more private, as if he were talking to himself as much as to her. "She saved my life," he said. Ruth Ann looked at him. 12 years ago," he said, "on a highway outside Las Vegas. She saved my life and 2 of my brothers, and then she disappeared. We tried to find her. We couldn't." He paused. "I made a promise, the kind of promise you don't take back." He reached up and opened the top of his vest, and Ruth Ann saw the tattoo fully for the first time, the skull with wings old and softened with time, the lines blurred at the edges. But she could see now that she was looking closely, something she had not noticed before. A deliberate imperfection in the design, a small flaw on the right wing, intentional in a way that only someone looking for it would find. "That mark on her shoulder," Rex said, closing his vest. "It's not decoration, it's not a style choice, it's a marker. It means she's under our protection. It means that if she ever needed us, we would come." He looked at Ruth Ann steadily. No questions, no hesitation, no matter what else was happening. Ruth Ann was quiet. She was absorbing this the way she had always absorbed difficult information, not reacting to it, not yet just taking it in and letting it find its place. "She never told me," she said. "She wouldn't have," Rex said. "That's who she is." And then, because it was the right moment in the right context, Rex Donahue told Ruth Ann Calloway what had happened on Highway 93 outside Las Vegas on a hot August night in 2012. He had been riding back with 2 brothers, Garrett Pruitt, who was 34 years old and had been with Iron Oath since he was 19, and Merle Stanton, who was 40 then and had been Rex's second for nearly a decade. Three men on three bikes on an empty stretch of desert highway at 11 at night, a run that had gone long. The simple, uncomplicated pleasure of an open road at night, the kind of riding that reminds you why you started. Merle had spent 4 months in recovery afterward, 2 surgeries, 3 weeks in a facility outside Prescott, where a doctor who owed the club a debt had handled everything off the books, and a long spring of rebuilding the lung capacity that the collapsed lung had cost him. He had come back to full strength by the following summer, stubborn and thorough about his rehabilitation, the way he was stubborn and thorough about everything. But in August of 2012 on that highway, he had been 40 years old and fighting hard just to keep breathing. The SUV had come out of the darkness with no headlights and no warning. It hit Garrett's bike from the rear at speed, not to disable but to destroy. Garrett went down at 70 miles an hour and did not get back up. Rex would learn later in the hours after that he had died before the asphalt stopped moving under him. The SUV had then moved to box in Rex and Merle. It had worked. Rex's bike had gone off the road into the rocky desert shoulder. He had dislocated his shoulder on impact. 3 ribs cracked, blood in his mouth from where his teeth had come together. Through the dust, in the pain, he had seen 4 men getting out of the vehicle. Not panicked, not rushed. Moving with the deliberate pace of professionals who knew exactly how this was supposed to end. They were not there to rob them. He had understood that immediately with the certainty of a man who has been in enough violent situations to recognize the difference between chaos and intention. These men had been hired. They had a job to do, and the job was to make sure none of the 3 men on those bikes got up from this road. Merle had fought hard. Merle always fought hard. He had taken 2 blows to the head and the kind of chest impact that collapsed his lung before his legs stopped working. Rex had kept going on will alone, the way you do when the alternative is a shallow grave in the Arizona desert, his right arm nearly useless, his vision narrowing at the edges, knowing that he was running out of time and body and options. And then a car had stopped. An old sedan, pale green in the moonlight, rusted along the lower panels. The kind of car that students and nurses and people without much money drive for years past the point when they should probably get something newer. It had pulled over on the shoulder 50 yards back, and the door had opened, and a woman had gotten out. She was young, 28, though Rex had not known that then. She was not large. She was not armed. She stood on the shoulder of the highway and took in the scene in front of her. 3 motorcycles, 4 men with weapons, 2 bodies on the ground. Rex barely standing, and she did not get back in her car. She shouted, not words, not threats, not a speech. Just sound loud, sudden, commanding, the kind of sound that cuts through violence, the way a whistle cuts through noise. It made the 4 men turn. It broke their concentration for 3 seconds. And 3 seconds, when you are already moving, is enough. Rex had grabbed the tire iron that had fallen from Merle's hand. He had swung it with everything he had left. He connected once hard, and the man went down, and the other 3 looked at each other in the way people look at each other when the cost-benefit calculation has suddenly shifted. They retreated. Fast. The SUV's tires threw gravel as it accelerated back onto the highway and disappeared. The woman had run toward Rex. He had tried to stay upright and failed. She had knelt beside him, and her hands had moved over him with a speed and precision that he recognized even through the haze of pain as professional pulse check breathing wounds, priority order. I'm a nurse, she had said. Stay with me. Her name, he would learn later, was Wren Calloway. She was 28 years old, driving home from a double shift at a Las Vegas hospital. She had no reason to stop. No reason to get involved. Every reason, in fact, to keep driving, to protect herself, to be sensible, to let the part of her brain that knew better make the decision that the part of her heart was overriding. She had stopped anyway. She had loaded Rex and Merle into her car, driven them not to a hospital where there would be questions and records and a paper trail leading directly back to them, but to a friend's apartment, off the grid, a quiet place that asked no questions. She had stitched Rex's wounds and managed Merle's collapsed lung with the supplies she carried in the car, the supplies that a trauma nurse carries because she has learned that the world does not always provide emergencies with adequate infrastructure. She had kept them stable and hidden for 3 days, lying to the people who came asking, taking risks that Rex could not fully calculate even now. She had never asked for money. She had never asked for information. On the morning of the fourth day, when Iron Oath Brothers had finally located them through channels that had nothing to do with anything traceable, Rex had woken to find her gone. She had left a piece of paper on the table beside him, a phone number, nothing else. No name, no explanation. He had called it within the hour. The line was already disconnected. She had moved, changed her number, stepped off the map as completely as a person can step off a map when they have decided that disappearing is the safest thing they can do. He had spent 3 months trying to find her. Her first name from the apartment manager, who remembered a young woman with dark hair who had come and gone quickly. The memory of her face. Not enough. She had moved, changed her phone, left nothing traceable behind. He had made the tattoo in her absence. Had the club's artist design it, the skull with wing, the Iron Oath mark, with one deliberate flaw in the right wing, an imperfection that only brothers would recognize. He had worn it on his chest as a promise, and he had sent a version of the design through a trusted intermediary who had eventually tracked down a forwarding address in Arizona with a note that said, "Only if you ever need us, we will come." He had never known if she received it. He had never known if she understood it. And 12 years had passed, and the story of the woman who stopped on the highway had become part of Iron Oath's history, one of those foundational things that new members heard and old members carried. And Rex had kept the promise alive by keeping it inside him, the way you keep alive the things that matter, by refusing to let them become only the past. Ruth Ann listened to all of this without interrupting. When he finished, she was quiet for a moment. Outside the diner, the October wind moved through the ponderosa pines with a low, searching sound. Becca had refilled Ruth Ann's coffee without being asked. The family with the 2 children had gone. The teenage boys had gone. Gerald had gone. The arguing couple had long since resolved or abandoned whatever they were arguing about. It was just the 6 men and the old woman now in the amber light of the Ridgeline Diner, and the weight of the 12 years sitting on the table between them. "She moved here 8 years ago," Ruth Ann said. "After her father died, she moved us both to Flagstaff. She said she wanted a quieter life. I thought it was grief." She paused. "I thought a lot of things." Rex was watching her. "She works at the clinic on Cedar." Ruth Ann continued. "She's a good nurse, a good daughter. She keeps to herself. She's been keeping to herself for 12 years, and I told myself it was just her nature." She stopped. "I knew something happened in Las Vegas. A mother knows. She came back from that city different, quieter, more careful." She looked at Rex. "She never told me what." "She wouldn't have," Rex said. And there was something in the way he said it, not dismissive, but certain, the certainty of a man who had thought about this woman's character for 12 years and had come to understand it without ever being able to speak to her again. "She does what she thinks is right, and then she steps back. She doesn't want credit. She doesn't want weight on other people." "That's my daughter," Ruth Ann said. "That's exactly my daughter." A silence settled between them that was different from the silences that had come before. Not awkward, not tense, but the silence of 2 people who have arrived through different roads at the same place. Then Merle Stanton, who had been on his phone for the last several minutes in the quiet, compressed way of a man conducting several conversations simultaneously, leaned close to Rex and said something low. Rex's expression did not change visibly, but something shifted in the set of his jaw. Something tightened. He looked at Ruth Ann. "We need to go," he said. "Now." Ruth Ann was already reaching for her jacket. "I'm coming with you," she said. Rex started to speak. She cut him off, not rudely, but with the particular authority of a woman who has spent a lifetime in rooms where someone needed to be in charge and had generally been that someone. I have been a trauma nurse for 35 years, she said. I have pulled men back from the edge of death in conditions that would make whatever you are worried about look manageable. I have driven through floods and fires and 2 in the morning emergencies, and I have never once waited in a diner while my family needed me. Yeah, she looked at him steadily. That is my daughter out there on that highway. Whatever is happening, whatever you know that I don't know yet, that is my daughter, and I am coming. Rex Donahue looked at her for a long moment. He saw in her eyes something he recognized, the same quality he had been trying to name for 12 years when he thought about a young woman who had stopped her car on a dark highway and gotten out without hesitation. The thing that was not bravado, not recklessness, not the absence of fear. It was something simpler and more durable than any of those things. It was the complete bedrock refusal to place her own safety above what she knew to be right. Ren Calloway had gotten it from somewhere. Now he knew where. He nodded once. You ride with me, he said. You hold on and you don't let go. Before they stood to leave, Merle turned his phone screen toward Rex for 2 seconds, long enough for Rex to read the message, short enough that it was not meant for anyone else. Rex read it. His jaw tightened in the specific way it did when information arrived that was unwelcome but not surprising. He handed the phone back without a word. What the message said was this: Aldous Vec had been confirmed in the Flagstaff area for 48 hours. His presence was not coincidental. An associate within a network that Iron Oath maintained had tracked the movement and flagged it 6 hours earlier, but the message had not reached Rex until now. Vec had not made a move yet because he was waiting for Boyd Gruder to confirm whether Ren Calloway had what he was looking for and waiting to know the answer to that question before he determined what came next. He was a careful man. Careful men did not act until they had the information they needed. But Boyd had been sent to Ren's car tonight, which meant Vec had decided he had waited long enough. Rex said none of this in the diner. He said it later on the highway through the radio that connected the 6 bikes. But he understood it now standing in the amber light of the Ridgeline Diner, and it changed the character of the urgency from something that was about a broken-down car and a worried mother into something that was about 12 years catching up with a woman who had been running from them without quite running, hiding, without quite hiding, living in the careful, diminished way of someone who has never fully believed they were safe. 5 minutes later, the Ridgeline Diner stood quiet in the October night, its amber windows lit against the dark. Becca standing at the counter with both hands wrapped around a coffee pot she had forgotten she was holding. Outside, 6 motorcycle engines turned over and settled into the collective thunder that had rolled through the parking lot 40 minutes ago in arrival and now rolled out of it in purpose. Ruth Ann Calloway sat behind Rex Donahue on the lead bike, her arms around his waist, the cold air hitting her face like a wall. She had never been on a motorcycle in her 72 years. The vibration of the engine went through her chest like a second heartbeat. She was not afraid. The highway opened in front of them, black and long and empty, the pine trees on either side standing dark against the stars, and the 6 lights of Iron Oath MC cut through the darkness the way intention cuts through doubt, directly without hesitation, with the particular quality of forward motion that has no interest in looking back. Somewhere 15 miles ahead in the darkness and the silence, Ren Calloway was waiting. Her mother was coming, and she was not coming alone. The stretch of Highway 89 north of Flagstaff is the kind of road that does not forgive inattention. It runs through high desert and ponderosa forests, 2 lanes of asphalt that follow the land's contours, without apology, rising and falling with the terrain, bending around rock formations that have been there since before the concept of roads existed, narrowing in places where the canyon walls come close enough that a truck and a motorcycle passing each other require both drivers to make a small, deliberate act of trust. At night, with no moon and no streetlights for 15 miles in either direction, it becomes something else entirely. It becomes the kind of dark that people who have grown up in cities do not have a reference for. The kind of dark that is not an absence of light so much as a presence of something older. Ren Calloway had driven this road 4,000 times in 8 years. She knew every bend. She knew the place at mile marker 7, where a family of deer crossed at dusk so reliably that she had started slowing down there out of habit. She knew the pullout at mile marker 11, where teenagers sometimes parked on weekend nights. She knew the long straightaway at mile marker 13, where the canyon opened up and the sky came back, and on clear nights, you could see the glow of Flagstaff to the south like a smudge of amber on the horizon. She knew this road, and the road had never frightened her until tonight. Her car had died at mile marker 12 and a half between two bends in the particular darkness of a section where the canyon walls rose close on both sides and the sky above was reduced to a narrow strip of stars. The engine had given her 30 seconds of warning to stutter or cough, the dashboard lights flickering in that specific pattern. That means the problem is electrical and serious, and she had managed to guide the car onto the gravel shoulder before it stopped entirely. She had sat for a moment in the sudden silence, hands still on the wheel, and done what she always did in the first seconds of a crisis: breathed, assessed, prioritized. The car was dead. That was manageable. She had a phone. She would call her mother, call a tow wait inside with the doors locked. She was 40 years old, and she had handled worse things than a breakdown on a dark highway, and there was no reason to treat this as anything other than what it appeared to be. She had called her mother. The signal had been what the signal always was in this particular canyon: one bar unreliable, the kind of connection that is technically present and functionally useless. The call had connected long enough for her to give her location, long enough to hear fragments of her mother's voice, and then the line had dissolved into static and silence. She had tried to call back. Nothing. She had sat back in her seat and looked at the road in both directions. Empty. The silence of high desert at night has a texture to it, a depth that silence in populated places does not. It is not the absence of noise so much as the presence of distance, the sound of a world that extends very far in every direction and does not particularly concern itself with the people moving through it. She had been telling herself for approximately 7 minutes that everything was fine, and then the headlights had appeared in her rearview mirror. She had watched them slow and stop 50 yards behind her, watched the door open, watched the figure get out and walk toward her car with the particular deliberate pace of someone who is not rushing because they do not need to rush, because they have already done the calculation and know how it ends. He stopped beside her window. He was younger than her, mid-30s, she guessed, with the look of a man who had spent time outdoors doing things that were not recreational. Not tall, but solid. He wore a dark jacket and jeans, and he stood close enough to the window that she could see his face clearly in the reflected glow of her dashboard. He raised his hand and knocked on the glass. 3 times. Unhurried, like a man knocking on the front door of a house he has been to before. Wren did not open the window. She had learned 12 years ago the particular difference between caution and fear. Caution was rational. Caution examined the available information and made a decision based on what was actually there. Fear was something else. Fear made everything look like a threat, made you reactive, made you stupid. She had worked very hard in the 12 years since Las Vegas to live from caution and not from fear. But her hands were not entirely steady on the steering wheel. "Ma'am," the man said. His voice came through the glass, muffled but audible. "You need some help." She looked at him and said nothing. "Saw your hazards," he said. "Looked like you might be in trouble." Her hazards were not on. She had not turned them on. She looked at him again, really looked the way her mother had taught her to look at people, the way nursing had refined. And she saw what she had been trying not to see since the moment he had gotten out of his car. She knew his face. Not well. Not the way you know someone you have spent time with. The way you know someone you have seen twice in a particular context in a particular place, a face that had registered in the part of her memory that stored things she had not consciously decided to keep. A hospital corridor, a waiting room, A man standing outside a set of double doors with the particular stillness of someone who was there not to visit but to watch. The Las Vegas Regional Medical Center, 2011 and early 2012, before everything. He had been there twice, maybe three times in the months before the night on Highway 93. She had registered him the way you register a face that appears in the same place more than once, noting it, filing it, not yet understanding why it mattered. She had understood why it mattered on the night she had crouched in the dust beside Rex Donahue on a dark Nevada highway and looked up and seen this same face 12 years younger, standing at the edge of the headlights, watching the men he had come with work. His name was Boyd Gruder. She had not known that then. She had not learned it until much later from a connection she would rather not have had to make. He had been 26 years old that night on Highway 93 working security for a man named Aldous Vec, present at the attack not as one of the four hired professionals, but as an observer, the eyes of the man who had arranged and paid for the whole thing sent to confirm the outcome. She had been hoping for 12 years that he had forgotten her face. He had not forgotten her face. Boyd Gruder was still standing at her window, his expression patient and entirely without warmth, and she understood now with perfect clarity what she had been telling herself was an ordinary breakdown on an ordinary night. She also understood something else, something that arrived cold and complete in the space of a single breath. She had been managing Aldous Vec's curiosity about her for 12 years by being quiet, by being invisible, by giving him no reason to act. But Vec was a careful man, and careful men eventually ran out of patience with uncertainties. He had sent Boyd tonight not on a whim, but because he had finally decided that the uncertainty of whether Ren Calloway had found something on that highway in 2012 was more dangerous than the certainty of dealing with her directly. The car failure was not accidental. Boyd had been in the clinic parking lot that day or close to it with enough access and enough time to create a problem in an electrical system that would strand her somewhere isolated, somewhere dark, somewhere with no signal and no witnesses. This had been planned, not tonight perhaps, but the pieces had been assembled over days or weeks, waiting for the right window. She looked in the rearview mirror at his car, still running, still parked on the shoulder behind her. And then she looked past it into the darkness further back down the road, and she saw something that sent a cold, specific understanding through her chest like a current. A second vehicle, parked further back, lights off, engine presumably running, sitting in the dark with the patience of something that is waiting for a signal. Boyd had not come alone. Boyd was not here because of tonight. He was here because Aldous Vec had finally decided that 12 years of uncertainty was long enough. She reached into her bag. Her phone was in the outside pocket where it always was, and she left it there for a moment, her hand going instead to the bottom of the bag, to the zippered interior compartment, where she kept the things she did not use but could not bring herself to discard. Her fingers found what they were looking for within seconds. They had found it the same way 10,000 times before in parking lots, in late nights and moments of ordinary anxiety when touching it had become a kind of reflex. The USB drive was small, barely larger than her thumbnail, wrapped in a piece of cloth that had been worn soft with handling. She had carried it for 12 years. She had never looked at what was on it. She had been afraid to look and afraid to throw it away, and so she had kept it in the place where she kept things that were too dangerous to use and too important to lose. She had taken it from the jacket pocket of one of the men on the highway in 2012, the man who had gone down hard when Rex swung the tire iron. He had fallen close to her, and she had seen something fall from his jacket, and she had picked it up without thinking, the way you pick things up without thinking. And then the men had retreated, and she had been busy with Rex and Merle. And by the time she had remembered what was in her hand, she had been driving toward Las Vegas, and it was too late to go back and too frightening to think about too carefully. She had understood in the years that followed that the USB was probably why they were still looking for her. Not because she had witnessed anything, not because she could identify Boyd Gruder in a lineup, the word of a nurse, against the resources of Aldous Vec was not a case that any reasonable person would bring. They were looking for her because of what she was carrying. Because whatever was on this drive was worth killing 3 men on a highway to protect. And they could not rest until they knew whether the woman who had stopped her car that night had found it and what she had done with it. She had done nothing with it. She had been afraid to do nothing with it and afraid to do something. She had just carried it the way you carry the things that are too heavy to put down and too dangerous to keep hoping that the weight would eventually become ordinary. It had not become ordinary. Boyd knocked on the window again, 3 more times, still patient, still unhurried. She looked at the drive in her hand, small, light. 12 years of being afraid reduced to something she could cover with her thumb. And then from the south, from the direction of Flagstaff, from the direction that was in this moment the only direction that mattered, she heard it, low at first. Below the threshold of certain identification, just a vibration in the night air, a rumble that could have been wind through the canyon or a truck on a distant road. But it grew. It grew with the specific character of multiple engines, large engines, engines that were being driven with purpose and speed, and it grew from the south and it grew fast. Boyd heard it too. She watched his face change, the first change of expression since he had walked up to her car, a flicker of something recalculating, something urgent, the look of a man whose timeline has just been altered without his consent. He stepped back from her window, looked south, looked back at the darkness where the second car was parked, reached for his phone. The lights came around the southern bend, first 6 pairs of headlights in formation and bright, filling the canyon walls with moving light. And then the sound hit her fully, the collective thunder of 6 Iron Oath motorcycles running at speed, and she felt it in her chest, not as fear, but as something that she did not have a clean word for, something between relief and recognition, the physical sensation of a door opening that has been closed for a very long time. The bikes came around the bend and slowed. They arranged themselves in front of and around her car with the precision of people who have done this kind of thing before and know exactly where each part of the formation belongs. Their headlights illuminated the stretch of highway, completely washing out the darkness that Boyd Gruder had been counting on. Boyd took 2 steps backward. The second car further down the road had its lights off and had not moved. Wren watched it in the rearview mirror. Watching, calculating, still. Rex Donahue cut his engine and swung off his bike in a single motion. The motion of a man who has been getting off motorcycles for 40 years and has long since stopped noticing that he does it. He looked at Boyd Gruder. Boyd looked at him. The other 5 men dismounted around them, and the geometry of the situation became very clear to everyone present. And then the figure climbing down from behind Rex turned, and Wren saw her mother's face in the headlight glow, and something broke open in her chest that she had been holding together with great care and considerable effort for 12 years. Ruth Ann Calloway walked across the gravel shoulder of Highway 89 with the same purposeful stride she used to walk across hospital floors, and she pulled open the passenger door of Wren's car, and she got in, and she took her daughter's face in both hands. "You're okay," she said, not a question. Wren was shaking. She had not known she was shaking until she stopped being alone in the dark, the way you do not always know how cold you are until you step somewhere warm. "Mom," she said, "how did you—" "I walked up to a man in a diner," Ruth Ann said with the particular tone she used when she was doing something she would never admit was extraordinary by treating it as entirely ordinary. "The way you raised me too." That was backwards, and they both knew it, and neither of them said so. Outside the car, Rex was still looking at Boyd Gruder. Boyd had not moved. He had the look of a man who was running through options and finding each of them inadequate. The math was simple. 6 Iron Oath MC riders on one side, a dark highway on every other. His second car still parked in the darkness behind, still not moving, still calculating. "That's your vehicle back there?" Rex asked. His voice was level, conversational, almost the way a certain kind of man's voice becomes more quiet the more serious the situation. Boyd said nothing. Merle Stanton appeared at Rex's left shoulder. He had a phone in his hand and he was looking at the screen with the expression of a man who has just confirmed something he had already suspected. He turned the screen toward Rex for 2 seconds. Rex looked at it. Something shifted in his jaw. "You need to leave," Rex said to Boyd. "Right now, both vehicles." Boyd looked at him for a long moment. He looked at the 6 men standing in the headlight wash, with the expressions of men who have dealt with more difficult situations than this, and emerged from all of them in whatever alcohol-adjacent courage or professional detachment he had arrived with had fully evaporated. He turned and walked back toward his car without another word, taking his time about it, performing a kind of dignity in the retreat that convinced nobody. The headlights of the second vehicle came on. Both cars turned around on the highway and drove south back toward Flagstaff, and their taillights shrank and disappeared around the bend. The highway was quiet again. Rex walked to Ren's car and stood beside the driver's window. Ren lowered it. For a long moment, neither of them said anything. He was looking at her, and she was looking at him, and 12 years sat between them like weather. Not hostile, not comfortable, just the fact of time and its weight, the way 12 years always feel when they collapse suddenly into the present tense. He was older. She had known he would be. The gray in his hair, the deeper lines in his face. But the quality in his eyes was the same clear direct, the eyes of a man who looked at things as they were. "Rex Donahue," she said. "Ren Calloway," he said. "How did you find me?" "Your mother found me," he said. "She walked up to me in a diner and told me you were in trouble." Ren looked at Ruth Ann, who was still sitting in the passenger seat with her hands folded, in the expression of a woman who has done what needed doing and is now waiting patiently for the rest of the world to catch up. "She does that," Ren said. "I know where she learned it," Rex said. They moved away from the road. Rex posted men at both ends of the visible highway, one north, one south, and the remaining 3 stood in a loose perimeter around the cars, close enough to be present, far enough to be private. Merle had the laptop out on the seat of his bike, the screen's glow pale in the dark. Ruth Ann got out of the car and stood beside Ren and took her hand the way she had taken her hand when Ren was 8 years old and had broken her arm falling out of the oak tree in their backyard, and again when she was 19, and her first serious relationship had ended badly, and again in a hospital corridor, when Ruth Ann's husband, Ren's father, had not come out of surgery the way they had hoped. The pressure of a hand, the specific weight of being known. "Tell me," Ruth Ann said quietly, not a demand, an opening. Ren looked at her mother, then at Rex, then at the USB drive still in her hand. And she told them. She started with Boyd Gruder's face in the hospital corridor. 2011, maybe early 2012, she had not known who he was, then had registered him only as a face in a place where face were supposed to mean something. A waiting room face, a watching face. He had appeared twice in 6 months, always on the floor where the critical cases went, always alone, always with the air of a man who is performing patience while actually waiting for specific information. She had noticed him because noticing was her job, and because something about him had not fit the ordinary grammar of a hospital visitor. She told him about the highway, her version of it from the inside the sedan's headlights, finding the shapes on the road, the moment of understanding what she was looking at, the way her hand had moved to the gear shift to drive away and then had not. She told him about getting out of the car, about the shouting, about kneeling in the gravel and finding Rex's pulse, and beginning the assessment that her training ran automatically even when everything else in her was terrified. She told him about the moment she had looked up and seen Boyd Gruder's face in the headlights, the recognition arriving slowly, and then all at once a hospital face, a watching face now, this face here in this context at the edge of this violence. And understanding with the cold precision that adrenaline sometimes produces what that connection meant. He worked for whoever had ordered this, and he had seen her face. She had not said anything to Rex that night. She had been afraid to say anything, afraid of what it might mean for her to be connected to whatever world this was, afraid of the chain of consequences that naming what she knew might set in motion. She told them about the USB, how it had come to be in her hand, the man going down, the object falling from his jacket, her picking it up without thinking the retreat of the SUV, leaving her holding something she did not understand and already could not safely put down. She held it out toward Rex. "I never looked at it," she said. "I was afraid of what was on it, and I was afraid of what would happen if someone found out I had it." Rex took it carefully, held it for a moment, feeling the weight of something that had been missing for 12 years, passed it to Merle. "And the tattoo," Ruth Ann said. She was looking at Wren with the expression of a woman assembling a picture that has been coming into focus for a long time. "The mark on your shoulder." 6 weeks after Vegas, Wren said, "I received an envelope at the address I was using in Arizona before I moved to Flagstaff. There was a photograph of the design, the skull with wings, with the flaw on the right wing. No note, nothing else." She paused. "I understood what it was. I understood what someone was promising." She looked at Rex. "I went and got it." "We tried to find you," Rex said. "I know," Wren said. "I made it hard." Why? The wind moved through the canyon above them, that high, cold sound that the ponderosas make at night when the temperature drops and everything contracts. "Because Boyd Gruder had seen my face," she said, "and I had seen his, and I knew who he worked for, and I knew that if Aldous Vec thought I was connected to you, that I had helped you, that I knew you, that there was any relationship between us, it would give him another reason to come after you, after what he had already paid to do." She paused. "And I knew you would come looking for me, because that's what the tattoo meant. And if you came looking, Boyd Gruder would follow you straight to me." She looked at Ruth Ann, her mother's face in the dark, steady and present. "But it was more than that," Wren said. "Dad had just died. You were alone and your health wasn't what it had been, and I was the only one left. If I had any connection to what happened on that highway to Rex to Iron Oath, to any of it, it put you in range of whatever Vec might decide to do about loose ends." She stopped. "So I moved us. I built the smallest possible life. I tried to make us too small and too quiet to be worth the effort. But you kept the drive," Ruth Ann said. "I couldn't throw it away," Wren said. "I didn't know what was on it. I didn't know if it was evidence of something. I didn't know if someone innocent was implicated in it. I couldn't throw it away." She looked at her hands. "So I carried it. For 12 years I carried it, and I told myself that one day I would know what to do with it." Ruth Ann squeezed her daughter's hand once, said nothing. The kind of silence that means I understand, and it is all right, and we are here now. Merle's laptop screen changed. He turned toward Rex slowly, and his face in the glow of the screen was the face of a man reading something he has been hoping to read for a very long time and finding it exactly as significant as he feared and hoped it would be. Rex walked to the bike and looked at the screen. The data was organized with the neat precision of someone who had kept careful records, because careful records were the infrastructure of the kind of business being conducted. Wire transfers, dates, account numbers, a spreadsheet that mapped the movement of money between Aldous Vec's holding company, Bridgewater Land and Development LLC, a name that appeared on documents filed with the Nevada Secretary of State, and a series of accounts that were not technically in his name but bore his organizational fingerprints in every digit and routing number. And attached to the spreadsheet, something more direct, a document that was not a legal contract, but functioned as one, the kind that exists only in the world of men who conduct transactions that cannot appear on invoices. Names, a date, a location, a fee. Highway 93 outside Las Vegas, August 14th, 2012. 3 names: Rex Donahue, Merle Stanton, Garrett Pruitt. Rex stood at the bike and read Garrett's name on the screen and did not move for a long time. Garrett Pruitt had been 34 years old. He had joined Iron Oath at 19 because he had nowhere else to go and had found inside the club the thing that people join clubs to find: belonging, purpose, the specific comfort of being among people who will stand with you when the rest of the world has decided they won't. He had been good at the things that mattered and indifferent to the things that did not. He had been the kind of man who remembered birthdays and never made it a big deal, and always knew when someone needed to talk and always pretended he had happened to be there anyway. He had a daughter named Clara, born 3 months before he died. She had grown up without ever knowing his voice. Rex had given the eulogy. He had kept it short because long eulogies were not the custom, and because he had not trusted himself to speak at greater length about a man he had loved like a brother. He had never known with certainty why Garrett had died. He had suspected Vec there had been a land deal gone wrong, a negotiation over a piece of territory in the Nevada desert that had turned contentious money that had moved in directions that suggested the dispute had not been resolved at the table. But suspicion without evidence was not justice, and in the 12 years since he had carried the weight of not knowing the way men carry the things they cannot put down and cannot resolve. Now he was looking at the contract. He turned away from the screen, looked at Wren Calloway standing in the dark with her mother's hand in hers, watching him with the expression of a woman who has been carrying something heavy for a very long time and has finally put it down and is not yet sure what the absence of the weight feels like. His name was Garrett Pruitt, Rex said. His voice was level, contained. He was 34 years old. I know, Wren said quietly. I found out his name afterward. I looked. Rex looked at her. I'm sorry, she said. I have been sorry for 12 years. I know that's not enough. It's not your fault, Rex said. You weren't the one who hired those men. I was the one who drove away afterward, Wren said, and didn't say anything, and kept something that might have mattered. You didn't know what it was, Rex said, and you were 28 years old and alone and afraid. That's not the same thing as doing nothing. He paused. And you didn't do nothing. You saved 2 lives on that road. That matters. That has always mattered. Merle appeared at Rex's shoulder. He spoke quietly. Vec knows Boyd failed to retrieve the drive. He'll be reassessing. We have a window, not a long one, before he decides what comes next. How long? Ruth Ann asked. Hours, Merle said. He'll wait for Boyd to check in. When Boyd doesn't, he'll start moving. Men like Vec have contingencies. Tonight was the contingency. When tonight fails, they go to whatever comes after tonight. Ruth Ann looked at Rex. Then we shouldn't waste time standing on a cold highway. They moved south in formation, Wren now riding behind Merle, Ruth Ann again behind Rex. The canyon walls rose and fell on either side, and the stars moved overhead, and the town of Flagstaff appeared in the distance as a warm glow against the black, and Ruth Ann watched it grow larger and felt the weight of what the next few hours required settling into her, with the particular clarity that she had always found unexpectedly in the middle of serious things. Not peace exactly, something more functional than peace. The quiet that comes when the options have been reduced and there is nothing left to decide except how to proceed with what you have. They pulled into a property on the south side of town, a salvage yard surrounded by a chain-link fence topped with wire, the kind of place that does not advertise itself and does not need to. Inside a large metal building at the back of the lot, there was a space that was part workshop and part meeting room, with a long table, several chairs, a refrigerator that held water and nothing else, and the kind of industrial lighting that made everything look very plain and very real. They sat around the table, Rex and Merle on one side, Wren and Ruth Ann on the other. The 4 riders took up positions around the room with the naturalness of men who have stood watch in various rooms at various hours for various reasons and have no feelings about it one way or the other. Merle opened the laptop again. The files from the USB were arranged on the screen, the spreadsheets, the transfer records, the document that was not quite a contract, but functioned as one. What we have, Merle said, is 12 years of Aldous Vec's financial relationship with 3 men who are currently incarcerated in 2 different states on unrelated charges. Wire transfers that go back further than 2012. A document that names Rex, Merle, and Garrett as the targets of a contracted action on a specific date in specific location. He looked at Rex. It's enough. Enough for what? Ren asked. Enough for the people who know how to use it, Rex said. There's an FBI agent in Phoenix, Merle said. Her name is Darlene Hobbs. She worked organized crime for 15 years before she moved to financial crimes. She's been building a case on Vex Holding Company for 3 years. She has the framework, the structure of the financial relationships, the pattern of the transactions, the circumstantial picture. What she has not had is something that breaks directly through the structure to the human decision underneath it. He nodded at the laptop. This breaks through. Ruth Ann was listening with the focused attention she had brought to complicated medical briefings for 35 years, not just the information itself, but the shape of it, the places where confidence was warranted, and the places where it was working harder than it needed to. And Vec, she said, while you contact this agent while the legal process begins, Vec is in Flagstaff tonight. He knows Boyd didn't come back with what he was sent for. He is making his own calculations right now. Yes, Rex said. How long does it take for a federal investigation to produce something that stops a man like that from acting further? The honest pause that followed was its own answer. Not tonight, Ruth Ann said. No, Rex said. Not tonight. Ruth Ann nodded. She looked at the table for a moment. She was doing what she had done for 35 years before making a significant decision, running through the variables, examining the logic, looking for the flaw. She found one flaw, acknowledged it, determined it was manageable, and moved past it. She looked at Ren. Her daughter was watching her with an expression Ruth Ann recognized from years ago, the expression Ren had worn at 16 when she had realized during an argument that her mother was about to do something that could not be talked out of or reasoned around. A kind of resigned, complicated respect. The look of someone who has learned that arguing with a certain kind of determination is like arguing with weather. He doesn't know who I am, Ruth Ann said. He knows Boyd failed. He doesn't know why. He doesn't know what we have or who is in this room or what has been decided. All he knows is that a woman who has been quiet for 12 years is suddenly connected to a failed retrieval operation. Yes, Rex said. So he's waiting, Ruth Ann said. And in that space between what he knows and what he's afraid of, he can be moved. She looked at Rex steadily. I want to call him, she said. Rex was silent for exactly 2 seconds. Then no. His number is in those files, Ruth Ann said. A business line listed in the holding company records. I want to call it. I want to tell him that I have what Boyd was sent to find. I want to arrange a meeting. She paused. And then I want to be in that meeting. Absolutely not, Ren said. Ruth Ann, Rex said. His voice was careful in the way that voices become careful when they are dealing with an idea that is simultaneously dangerous and possibly correct. What you're describing puts you directly in front of a man who has already paid once to have people killed. I know what I'm describing, Ruth Ann said. I'm describing a 72-year-old woman calling a man who is accustomed to being the most dangerous presence in any room he occupies. And I'm describing the fact that he will not see a 72-year-old woman as a threat. She looked around the table. He will see her as a problem with an obvious solution. He will be contemptuous and he will be careful and he will agree to the meeting because he will believe it is the simplest path to resolving the situation cleanly. A frightened old woman who found something she shouldn't have and wants to be compensated for returning it and left alone. That is a story men like Aldous Vec understand completely. It requires no creativity on their part. She looked at Rex, and that is exactly why it will work. Merle looked at Rex. Rex was looking at Ruth Ann with an expression that lived somewhere between resistance and the particular attention a person pays when they are recognizing something true that they would prefer were not true. You have never met this man, Rex said. I have met this man 1,000 times, Ruth Ann said. Different names, different offices, different variations on the same fundamental belief that they are the only real person in any room and everyone else is a variable in their calculations. Her voice did not rise. It did not need to. I spent 35 years in emergency rooms. I have dealt with men who believe their money or their authority exempted them from the ordinary rules of cause and effect. I know how they think. I know what they are incapable of imagining. And the thing they are most incapable of imagining is being outmaneuvered by someone they have already dismissed. She paused. They always underestimate the old woman. Every single time. The room was quiet. Ren made a sound that was not quite a laugh and not quite anything else, the sound of someone who has just watched something they have known their whole life demonstrate itself with particular clarity. Mom, she said. Ruth Ann looked at her daughter. You stopped your car on a dark highway when you were 28 years old, she said. You got out of your car for strangers in the dark. You spent 3 days in a borrowed apartment keeping two men alive who you did not know, and then you walked away and you carried what you found for 12 years because you could not bring yourself to throw it away because some part of you knew it mattered, because I raised you to stop when everyone else keeps driving. She paused. And I have been sitting in that car tonight and in that diner and in this room, and I have been watching what 12 years of being afraid has done to you. And I am telling you that it ends tonight, not tomorrow. Tonight. She looked back at Rex. Let me finish what she started. Rex Donahue looked at Ruth Ann Calloway for a long time. He looked at her the way he had looked at her in the diner, the way he had been looking at her since she had stood up from that corner booth and walked across the room towards six men in leather vests without breaking stride. He was looking for the thing he had learned to look for over 30 years of reading people in situations where reading people correctly was the difference between good outcomes and bad ones, the difference between courage and recklessness, between clarity and adrenaline, between the person who knows exactly what they are doing and the person who only believes they do. What he found looking at Ruth Ann Calloway at a metal table in a salvage yard at 1 in the morning was the former, plainly and unmistakably. He looked at Merle. Merle gave him the smallest nod, the nod of a man who has run the calculation independently and arrived at the same answer. You call him, Rex said. You tell him you have the drive. You tell him you want to meet and you want cash because men like him understand cash and understand the particular kind of ordinary greed that makes ordinary people take unnecessary risks. You give him a location that we choose. You give him 1 hour. He paused. But you do not walk into that meeting without a perimeter in place, and you do not walk into it without a way for us to hear everything that's said. I assumed I would have company, Ruth Ann said. Company he won't see coming, Rex said. We set the location. We set the perimeter. Merle transmits the drive contents to Agent Hobbs before we move the full file documented and sent through a channel she can receive at any hour so that it exists independently of whatever happens in the next few hours. Hobbs gets what she needs to formalize what she's been building for 3 years. And Vec on record, Merle added, his voice, his words, his acknowledgement, enough to remove any remaining daylight between what we can prove and what we know. She can execute on a warrant that quickly, Ruth Ann asked. She's had a warrant framework prepared for 8 months, Merle said. She's been waiting for the evidence to complete it. With what's on this drive, she doesn't need to build from scratch. She needs to make one call to a federal judge she's worked with for 15 years, who will answer his phone at any hour for a case of this kind. He paused. It won't take long. Ruth Ann looked at Ren. Ren had been quiet during the planning discussion, watching her mother with the expression of someone who has arrived after considerable internal resistance at a particular acceptance. When she spoke, her voice was steady. I want to be there, she said. Not in the meeting, not visible, but I want to be there. She looked at Rex. She's my mother. 300 meters back, Rex said, in a vehicle. You stay in that vehicle until I say otherwise. Agreed, Ren said. They spent 40 minutes on the details. Merle transmitted the drive contents to Agent Darlene Hobbs through a channel Ruth Ann did not ask about, and that Hobbs, when she answered her phone at 1:45 in the morning, received with the focused urgency of a woman who had been waiting for exactly this kind of call for a long time. The conversation between Merle and Hobbs was brief and technical, and ended with a timeline and a location confirmation. Hobbs asked 3 questions, got 3 clear answers, and moved without additional discussion. The location was chosen carefully, the commercial parking lot behind a closed warehouse supply building on the east side of town, flat and wide with sightlines in every direction. No natural cover, close and easy to approach and observe, difficult to make suddenly dangerous without being seen doing it. Rex walked Ruth Ann through what she would say and what she would not say, and she listened without interrupting and asked 2 clarifying questions that were both sharp and practical, and he found himself thinking, not for the first time that night, that she was the most composed person in the room. At 2:15 in the morning, Ruth Ann sat in the metal building with a phone that was not hers and a number printed from the holding company records on a folded piece of paper, and she dialed. It rang 4 times. She had prepared for voicemail. She was composing the words in her mind when the line connected. Who is this? Not a question. The flat, controlled delivery of a man who answers unknown numbers at 2 in the morning with authority rather than alarm, as if the inconvenience belongs to the person who called. My name doesn't matter, Ruth Ann said. Her voice was the voice she had used for 35 years to deliver difficult information in difficult circumstances, clear, steady, without the performance of steadiness. What matters is that I have something that belongs to you. Something small, something a man you sent to retrieve it tonight was not able to bring back. A silence, careful and listening. I'm not interested in complications, Ruth Ann continued. I'm not interested in anything other than a simple transaction. I'm an old woman who found something and would very much like to be compensated for returning it and then forgotten about entirely. That should be simple for everyone involved. Another silence, shorter this time. She could hear the calculation in it, not alarm, not anger, but the sound of a man running numbers. What are you asking for? The voice said. $50,000 in cash, Ruth Ann said, in the complete and permanent absence of any further interest in my daughter or myself. She paused. Those are not negotiable conditions, but they are also not unreasonable uses given what I'm offering in return. A pause. Where? She gave him the location. She gave him 1 hour. She told him to come with one person and the cash. She told him with the faint note of elderly practicality that she had calibrated carefully, that she was too old for complicated situations and simply wanted this concluded so she could go home and sleep. There was a silence on the line that lasted longer than the others. She understood what was happening in it, a man determining whether the story he was being told was the story that was actually happening, or whether it was a different story wearing the first story's clothing. A careful man, a man who had survived a long time in a particular kind of world by not accepting things at face value. She let the silence sit. She did not fill it. She had learned in emergency rooms that the most dangerous thing you could do in a silence was try to end it prematurely. 1 hour, Vex said. He hung up. Ruth Ann set the phone on the table and then looked at her hands. They were steady. They had been steady throughout. She was mildly impressed with them. He'll bring more than one person, she said. 3, Mom, Rex said. Maybe 4. He won't go anywhere that requires this kind of conversation without coverage. And Boyd, Merle said simply, Boyd is having a difficult night. He won't be mobile for some time. He said this in the tone of a man describing a logistical outcome that did not require elaboration, and Ruth Ann decided not to require elaboration. They moved at 3:15. 2 of Rex's riders had been in position at the warehouse lot for 20 minutes before the car driven by a third Iron Oath man pulled into the parking lot and stopped under the central sodium lamp. Rex and the remaining rider took positions in the darkness beyond the lot's perimeter. 300 meters back on a side street with an unobstructed line of sight, a vehicle sat dark and still with Wren in the passenger seat and the engine running. Rex was beside her. He had positioned himself there not because it was tactically optimal, but because it was the right thing. She should not be alone in that car watching what was about to happen. Ruth Ann got out of the car and stood in the orange light. She stood in her dark green jacket and her practical shoes and her silver hair, and she looked like what she was, a 72-year-old woman alone waiting. She had the piece of cloth that had wrapped the USB in her hand folded neatly visible. She did not scan the perimeter. She did not look for Rex's position or Merle's. She stood as though she were waiting for a late bus on a familiar corner. "She's steady," Rex said quietly. Wren was watching her mother in the orange light and feeling something too large and too layered for a single description. "She's been steady my whole life," Wren said. "I used to think it meant she wasn't afraid. I know better now. I know it means she's afraid and does it anyway. Every single time." Rex said nothing. He understood this completely. He had been doing the same thing for 30 years. At 3:37, two vehicles entered the lot from the north entrance. A black SUV and a dark sedan, unhurried, sweeping the lot with their headlights before parking 30 feet from where Ruth Ann stood. The choreography of men who have done this kind of thing before and are not treating it as anything other than routine. Three men got out of the SUV, one man got out of the sedan. Aldous Vec was 57 years old and carried it the way men carry money, not ostentatiously but as a fact of his person, something that had reorganized the space around him so long ago that he had stopped noticing the reorganization. He was not physically imposing. He did not need to be. He had the compact, settled look of a man whose threats had always been expressed through mechanisms other than his own body, and whose body had therefore been free to become something else, something groomed and controlled, and accustomed to the kind of deference that does not require demonstration. He walked toward Ruth Ann with one man beside him and two behind, and he looked at her with the expression she had predicted with near-perfect accuracy, the expression of a man who has driven across town in the middle of the night to deal with a threat and found standing in an orange-lit parking lot a small, silver-haired woman in a green jacket. Contempt and calculation in roughly equal measure. He stopped 6 feet from her. "You're the one who called," he said. "I am," Ruth Ann said. He looked at the cloth in her hand. "Is that it?" "What's left of the wrapping," Ruth Ann said. "The drive itself is somewhere secure. I wanted to confirm you'd arrived before I made it accessible. A reasonable precaution given the nature of the conversation." Vex studied her. The assessment behind his eyes was visible, not because he was careless, but because he had decided it did not matter whether she saw it. She was not in his calculation capable of using it. "You're a careful old woman," he said. "I've had to be," Ruth Ann said. "My daughter found something she shouldn't have 12 years ago. It has been causing a kind of low-level disruption in both our lives ever since. I would like the disruption to end. I imagine you would as well." "Your daughter," he said. "Wren Calloway," Ruth Ann said. "She's a nurse. She works at a clinic on Cedar Avenue. She has never done anything to anyone in her life, and she has been living very carefully for 12 years because she happened to stop her car on the wrong road on the wrong night." She looked at him with the direct, undeflected gaze she had used in emergency rooms for 35 years. "I am asking you as one person to another to let it go. Take what she found. Take the drive. Walk away. Let her have her life." Vec looked at her for a long moment. Something moved through his expression that she had not expected. Not irritation, not impatience, but something closer to genuine curiosity. The look of a man who has dealt with a great many situations over a long career and has not recently encountered one that surprised him. "You're not afraid of me," he said. "I'm 72 years old," Ruth Ann said. "I buried my husband. I held the hands of hundreds of people in the worst hours of their lives. I have been afraid of things that actually warranted fear." She held his gaze steadily. "You are a man who arranges harm from a distance because looking at it directly is not something you are able to do. That is not frightening to me. It is, if I'm honest, a little sad." Aldous Vex stared at her. The words had landed where she intended them to land, not to provoke but to occupy him, to fill the space with something unexpected enough to hold his attention for the necessary seconds. And then from the east and the west and the north, the lights came on. Three federal vehicles, dark and purposeful, their signals cutting across the orange lot with the particular authority of machinery that has been waiting for exactly this moment. Agent Darlene Hobbs moved across the parking lot with the pace of a woman who has been doing her job for a long time and has no remaining patience for the theatrical. 48 gray at her temples, the kind of face that has processed a great deal without losing its capacity to process more. She walked past Vec's men who had made the correct calculation about what moving would cost them, and she stopped near Ruth Ann and looked at her briefly with an expression that contained, if Ruth Ann was reading it correctly, something that was not quite admiration but lived in the same neighborhood. She turned to Vec. Aldous Vec, she said, I have documentation covering 12 years of financial activity that I believe you'd prefer to discuss somewhere more private, and a warrant that disagrees with that preference. We can begin here or we can begin downtown, but we begin tonight. Vec looked at Ruth Ann. The calculation behind his eyes had not stopped. It had simply run out of variables that resolved in his favor. He was looking at her the way a man looks at someone when he has understood too completely and too late that he misread the situation at every single point. He had heard a frightened old woman on the phone. He had seen an ordinary opportunity for a clean resolution. He had walked into a parking lot at 3:30 in the morning to deal with a manageable problem. The old woman, he said, quietly, almost private. The old woman, Ruth Ann agreed. Rex appeared from the darkness at the perimeter of the lot, and two of his riders with him, and they stood at a distance that was not law enforcement distance, but the distance of people who are present as witnesses, as record, as the physical embodiment of a promise that had been made 12 years ago and was now being completed. Rex looked at Vec without expression for a moment. Then he looked at Ruth Ann. She gave him the smallest nod. Hobbs's people moved. Vec's hands went behind his back. His men stood with the stillness of people who had made a rapid assessment of their legal exposure and decided that cooperation was the rational response. Boyd Gruder, delivered to the south side of the property by Iron Oath riders who had collected him on his way to a motel, was placed in a second federal vehicle. The whole operation took 11 minutes and was conducted with the efficient quiet of professionals who had rehearsed their parts, if not this specific performance. Ruth Ann stood in the orange light and watched. After a while, she was aware of someone beside her, and she looked and found Wren there, who had left the vehicle at some point during the controlled proceedings, drawn across the 300 meters by the particular gravity of watching your mother stand in a parking lot at 3:40 in the morning, having dismantled something that had weighed on both their lives for 12 years. They stood together without speaking. How did you know he'd answer? Wren asked eventually. Men who operate the way he operates cannot afford to let unknown calls go to voicemail. Ruth Ann said, the cost of missing one is too high. They always answer. And that he'd come. Because I gave him a story he recognized, Ruth Ann said. Ordinary greed, ordinary fear, an old woman who found something and wants money for it. That story requires no creativity from him. It fits into a category he has experience with. Men like that are very comfortable inside categories they recognize. Wren looked at her. And the part about not being afraid of him? That was simply the truth, Ruth Ann said. Truth is usually more effective than any alternative. Wren made a sound that resolved quietly into something that was genuinely a laugh. Soft, brief, exhausted, and entirely real. The laugh of a person who is too tired for pretense and has found in the absence of pretense something uncomplicated and warm. Rex came and stood with them. He had the coin in his hand. She could see it in the orange light, the Iron Oath insignia, worn smooth with years of handling heavy for its size. He held it toward Wren. This has been yours for 12 years, he said. Wren looked at it. She reached out and took it and held it for a moment with the particular care of someone receiving something that has been carried a long distance. Then she looked at her mother. Something passed between them that was entirely private and entirely complete, the compressed communication of two people who know each other so well that the important things do not require sentences. Wren held the coin out toward Ruth Ann. She's the one who came for me, Wren said. She's the one who walked into that diner and made everything that happened tonight possible. If she had stayed in her booth with her head down, she stopped, started again more simply. It should be hers. Rex looked at Ruth Ann. Ruth Ann looked at the coin in her daughter's hand for a long moment. At the insignia on one face and the engraved word on the other, she tilted it in the orange light until she could read it. A single word. Returned. She folded Wren's fingers back around the coin. You keep it, she said. It was made for you. It belongs to you. She looked at Rex directly. The debt is settled. You made a promise and you kept it completely at 3 in the morning on a dark highway when you didn't have to. That is not a small thing. That is, in fact, the most important kind of thing there is. She paused. Oh, it's finished, not forgotten finished. There's a difference about my... Rex was quiet for a moment. The promise didn't come with an expiration, he said. No, Ruth Ann said, but it has a completion. You gave her something to hold for 12 years, something that said in the language of ink and metal, someone will come. She held it. You came. She looked at him steadily. That's not a debt anymore. That's family. And family doesn't keep score. Rex looked at her for a long moment. Then he reached into the inside pocket of his vest and produced a second coin identical in size, the same worn surface, the iron oath insignia on the obverse. He held it out. This one was made when we started writing tonight, he said, because I had a feeling you were going to turn out to be the kind of person who warranted one. Wren took it without being asked and put it in her mother's hand. Ruth Ann looked down at it. She turned it over. On the reverse, in the same careful engraving, a single word that was not returned, stopped. She looked up at Rex, not immediately understanding. You stopped, he said. The way she stopped 12 years ago, when everyone else would have kept driving. You got up from a corner booth in a diner and you walked towards something instead of away from it, and everything that happened afterward followed from that. He paused. That's the only thing that ever really matters. The stopping. Everything else comes from there. Ruth Ann looked at the coin for a long moment. Then she put it in the pocket of her green jacket over her heart and said nothing because there was nothing that needed to be added to what had just been said. Agent Hobbs came and took statements. The conversation was thorough and covered 12 years of ground, from a Nevada highway in August of 2012 to an October parking lot in Flagstaff in the early hours of a morning that was beginning to feel incrementally like it might eventually become a day. Wren spoke clearly and completely, saying things she had not said for 12 years, with the directness of someone who has been carrying them long enough and has arrived at the place where putting them down is not a choice, but a necessity. Ruth Ann listened. She had known the shape of this story for years without knowing its content. She had known it in the particular silence that had followed Wren's return from Las Vegas, in the careful smallness of the life her daughter had constructed in Flagstaff, in the way Wren sometimes paused before answering questions about the past, as if she were checking each answer against a map she had been keeping privately. Hearing it whole was different from knowing it in pieces. She sat with it the way she had always sat with hard truths, not trying to revise it into something more manageable, just letting it be what it was, and finding, as she had almost always found, that the truth was easier to carry when it was fully seen. They were in the Federal Building until nearly 6 in the morning. When they came out, the sky to the east was the particular dark blue of the last hour before dawn, not light yet, but the end of complete darkness, the first suggestion that the night has a limit after all. The air was cold and very still. The street was empty. A long way off, a truck moved on a highway, its engine a low and distant sound that made the silence around it more complete. Rex and Merle and 2 of the riders were on the sidewalk outside. They had been there, Ruth Ann understood, the entire time. Not because they had been asked to wait, because it had not occurred to them to do otherwise. She walked up to Rex. You didn't have to stay, she said. We were in the area, he said. The ghost of something in his expression that was not quite a smile, but occupied the same space. She looked at him, at the gray and the lines and the pale eyes that had spent 58 years looking at things directly without the intermediary of distance or indifference. A man who had made a promise in the dark and kept it for 12 years without knowing if it would ever be needed and without asking whether keeping it was worth the cost. Garrett Pruitt's daughter, Ruth Ann said. She's 15. Yes. She should know, Ruth Ann said. Not a legend, not a story, the actual man who he was, what he was good at, what he cared about. Children need to know their parents were real people, not just absences. She paused. Whatever it cost you to tell it, she deserves to know. Rex was quiet for a moment. Something moved through his expression, the slow, careful movement of grief that has been stored in a particular place for a long time and is being asked gently to come out and be looked at. I'll tell her, he said. Ruth Ann nodded. Then she extended her hand. Rex Donahue shook it the way two people shake hands when they have been through something together that neither will forget and neither needs to describe firmly, simply with the particular respect of people who have seen each other clearly and found what they saw to be worthy of the seeing. They drove home as the sky turned from dark blue to gray to the first thin gold of an October morning. Ruth Ann drove. Wren sat in the passenger seat with the coin in her hand, turning it the way she had turned the USB drive for 12 years, but differently without the weight. With something that was the opposite of the weight, something she was still learning the name of. The town woke around them in the incremental way that small cities wake, the first delivery trucks, the lights coming on in the windows of people whose ordinary days were beginning, the particular quality of early morning that belongs to people who have been up all night and can see from the outside the ordinary world resuming its ordinary pace. Their house looked exactly as it always looked. The oak tree in the front yard, its October leaves more than half gone. The porch light that Ruth Ann left on when she went out and that she had forgotten to turn off before she left for the diner the previous evening. The curtains in the front window that Wren had chosen 8 years ago when they moved in. They sat in the car in the driveway for a moment without getting out. The engine ticked as it cooled. The sky was pink at the eastern edge, just beginning. Mom, Wren said. I know, Ruth Ann said. I should have told you. I should have trusted you with it. You deserved. You were protecting me, Ruth Ann said. The same instinct I had tonight walking into that parking lot. The same thing you did on that highway in 2012. It comes from the same place, she paused. It's not always the right call, but it never comes from a wrong place. Wren was quiet. I'm going to need you to trust me from here on, Ruth Ann said. Not because I can fix everything. I can't. But because carrying things alone is harder than it needs to be, and you have been carrying things alone for long enough. Wren looked at her mother in the early morning light, at the silver hair, in the steady eyes and the gold wedding band that had never come off, and she felt something release in her chest that she had not known until it released how tightly she had been holding. Okay, she said, simply. Okay. They went inside. Ruth Ann made coffee. Wren sat at the kitchen table, still in her coat, and watched her mother move through the kitchen with the familiar efficiency of a woman who has made coffee in this space every morning for 8 years and does not need to think about where anything is. The ordinary domestic choreography of a life that had this morning changed in ways that would take time to fully understand. The coin was on the table between them. Wren's coin, the original. The one that had been made in Wren's absence by a man who had decided that a promise needed a physical form, that it needed to exist as an object in the world, and not only as an intention in a person. She picked it up. He kept it for 12 years, she said. He didn't know where I was. He told the story to every new member of the club. He kept the promise alive by... She stopped. By refusing to let it be only the past. That's what promises are, Ruth Ann said. She set a mug in front of Wren. You don't keep them because you're confident they'll be needed. You keep them because you made them. The keeping is the point. The coffee was strong and hot, and the kitchen was warm, and outside the window, the October morning was arriving with the clear, specific quality of high altitude After a cold night, the lights sharp on the ponderosas and the edges of the rooftops in the long empty street. They drank their coffee. They talked eventually slowly in the fragmented way of people who have been through something large and are beginning the process of making it into language that can be carried. Ruth Ann asked questions she had been holding for years, and Wren answered them completely and without omission, and the kitchen held all of it without judgment and without drama, the way good rooms hold difficult things. Outside, the town completed its morning and moved into its day. Cars appeared on the street. A neighbor walked a dog past the front of the house. The oak tree in the yard dropped two more leaves in a gust of October wind. Inside, a mother and a daughter sat at a kitchen table and talked until the coffee was gone, and the morning was fully established, and the night felt for the first time like something that was genuinely behind them. A week later, a package arrived with no return address. The handwriting on the outer envelope was careful and deliberate, the handwriting of a person who writes slowly because they want the words to be exact. Inside was a photograph printed large mounted simply on backing board. 6 motorcycles on Highway 89 at dawn, shot from behind the riders, small against the wide expanse of canyon and sky, the road ahead of them long and straight and open and lit at the edges with the first gold of morning. Someone had been there before dawn with a camera and patience waiting for the light to be exactly right. On the back, in the same careful hand, a short paragraph. Courage is stopping when everyone else drives past. She stopped. She carried it for 12 years without knowing what it was worth. Her mother came for her in the dark, walked toward what everyone else walked away from, and turned the light on so everyone could see. The debt is paid. The promise stands. Family is not blood. It is who shows up and when and what they refuse to do to you when the room goes quiet and they could do anything. Ruth Ann read it standing at the front door in the gray morning light, still in her robe, the oak tree behind her dropping leaves onto the porch in the October wind. She read it twice. Then she carried it to the hallway where she kept the photographs that mattered. Her husband at 40 caught mid-laugh at something outside the frame, the joy in his face as unconsidered and complete as breathing. Wren at her nursing school graduation, squinting into the sun, her cap slightly crooked, her smile the smile of someone who has worked very hard for something and cannot quite believe they have it. The two of them at the rim of the Grand Canyon on summer afternoon, years before everything changed, standing with their arms around each other, and the vast and ancient distance spreading out behind them, blue and endless and indifferent and beautiful. She hung the photograph there, among the people she loved. She stood and looked at it for a moment, the 6 small figures on the long road, the light beginning at the edges of everything, the sky above the canyon opening into the kind of morning that does not know. It is extraordinary because it has never been anything else. Then she straightened the frame the way she always straightened frames, because things that mattered deserve to hang straight. She went back to the kitchen. She refilled her coffee. She sat down at the table where a coin sat in a small dish beside the salt and pepper turned, so the engraved word faced up. Stopped. She sat in the quiet of a house that had, after a long time, and by a route that she could not have predicted and would not have chosen, arrived at the thing she had been trying for years to provide for both of them. Not safety exactly. Safety was a complicated thing, and she had been a nurse long enough to know that the people who wanted to guarantee it completely were either lying or had not thought carefully about what the guarantee cost. But something adjacent to safety, something more durable. Peace, the kind that is not the absence of difficulty, but the presence of people you trust to face it with you. The kind that does not require you to be smaller or quieter or more careful than you actually are. The kind that lets you leave the porch light on, not because you are afraid of the dark, but because you want anyone coming home to be able to find the door. Outside, the October morning continued its business. The light on the ponderosas shifted as a cloud moved across the sun and then moved on. Down the street, a school bus stopped and children got on and the bus moved away and the street was quiet again. Inside, Ruth Ann Calloway drank her coffee in a kitchen that smelled like coffee, in the faint residual warmth of a house where two people had talked honestly for the first time in 12 years. She was 72 years old. She had buried her husband and raised her daughter and worked 35 years in rooms where the stakes were as high as stakes get, and had done it without losing the thing that had made her walk across a diner at 10:30 on a Thursday night towards six men in leather vests. She had no name for the thing. She had never needed one. It was simply what she was. The coin caught the light on the table in front of her, and she looked at it, and she thought about a dark highway and a young woman who had stopped her car when everyone else would have kept driving. And she thought about the fact that courage was almost never loud, was almost never the thing it looked like from the outside, was almost always just a person deciding in the quiet of an ordinary moment to do what they already knew was right. She had raised a daughter who knew how to stop. She hoped sitting in the morning light of a kitchen in Flagstaff, Arizona with coffee that was still hot, in a photograph hanging straight in the hallway, in a coin on the table bearing a single word that was exactly the right word that she had shown her daughter something else too. That stopping was only the beginning. That what happened after the stopping, the caring, the holding, the refusing to throw away the things that mattered, even when the weight of them was considerable, that was the rest of it. That was the whole of it. That was enough.